Welcome to the Inns of Court Armoured Car Regiment channel. Today's video will be covering the preparations and planning for Operation Overlord that the squadron partook in and the outline of the general plan that they were to action. In February 1944, the commanding officer of the Inns of Court Regiment, Colonel Bingley, was tasked with an operation involving armoured cars and Royal Engineers, in which they were to destroy bridges behind enemy lines. The task of which was assigned to C Sqn of the regiment and was received by the squadron's commanding officer, Major Strakosk. An attachment of 5 officers and 35 other ranks from the Royal Engineers were attached to C Sqn, and training started on the 4th of April 1944 in the areas of Frockley and Wickham near Southampton. Training for the mission was carried out by the entirety of C Sqn and consisted of poring over large-scale maps of the terrain from the beach to the objectives. These details were put to memory by the crews and would have included the locations of enemy defences, gun positions, road widths and road conditions. Furthermore, aerial photographs of the landing beach as well as the target bridges and their surrounding areas were studied at great detail. Training continued through April and May of 1944, which also included various amphibious exercises. Particular attention to waterproofing of the vehicles was carried out, as they would need to cope with wading ashore from the landing craft. Waterproofing initially started with training materials, followed by the use of operational materials. During the latter part of the training, the squadron was divided up between those participating in the invasion and those who were not, with those who were not participating rejoining the rest of the regiment at Dorman's Park, Surrey. The remainder of C Sqn received its final briefing on the 2nd of June. The plan was for C Sqn of Inns of Court Regiment to advance inland at utmost speed to the River Orne and destroy the main crossings over the river between Firle Harcourt to a point 5 kilometres south of Caen. Furthermore, additional crossings over the River Odon were to be prepared for demolition. The objective of these actions was to slow German reinforcements, particularly the 21st Panzer Division that was suspected to be located in the Forêt de Sanglé, a large forest south of Caen. In order to carry out this operation, C Sqn was reorganised into 12 half-sized Sabre troops, each consisting of 1 Daimler Dingo scout car and 1 Daimler armoured car. All vehicles were to be painted black in order to increase their chances of slipping by unnoticed behind enemy lines, in the hope that enemy units might mistake them for friendlies. However, so that they weren't mistaken for enemy units by Allies, all vehicles sported white Allied 5-pointed stars on their mudguards, and the regiment serial number, the figures 44 on a green over blue square with a white bar at the top, was present. The Daimler armoured cars also had a yellow band painted around their turrets in order to further assist in being recognised as friendly units. Attached to 9 of the 12 half-troops was a half-track carrying a troop of Royal Engineers and the necessary explosives to carry out the demolitions. These were M14 half-tracks, originally an anti-aircraft variant of the M5 half-track that was provided to Britain via Lend-Lease. These were converted back to regular half-tracks upon reception in the UK, and therefore would have appeared and acted in the same way as an M5 half-track during this operation. The Sabre troops and officer commanding were as follows: Troop 1, commanded by Lieutenant P.S. Wall. Troop 2, commanded by Lieutenant L.T. Yodekin. Troop 3, commanded by Lieutenant O. J. Shinat. Troop 4, commanded by Lieutenant P. E. Reeve. Troop 5, commanded by Lieutenant A. T. Cork. Troop 6, commanded by Lieutenant P. S. Wall. Troop 1A, commanded by Sergeant W. Wright. Troop 2A, commanded by Sergeant Mac Quinstan. Troop 3A, commanded by Lieutenant P. R. D. Shaw. Troop 4A, commanded by Sergeant J. Wright. Troop 5A, commanded by Lieutenant W. I. H. Gwenny Jones. Troop 6A, commanded by Lieutenant Wigram. Royal Engineer half-tracks were assigned to Troops 1, 1A, 2, 3, 3A, 4, 5, 5A and 6. In addition, there was a headquarters section consisting of 2 Daimler armoured cars, 1 Daimler Dingo scout car, one M14/M5 half-track and one white scout car. All of the 38 vehicles were to be loaded upon 2 LCTs, with the 12 half-troops and 9 Royal Engineer half-tracks divided up as evenly as possible between the 2 craft, such that should one LCT be lost, the remainder would still be able to carry out the mission with limitations. The squadron was to land on Juno Beach 30 to 60 minutes after H-hour, which would put them on the beach shortly after the first wave. The landing zone was to be just west of Grèce-sur-Mer on Mike Green Beach, which was to be under the command of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. At the time of landing, the squadron could expect no heavy support, apart from a few DD tanks which would be dealing with enemy gun emplacements on the beach. It was envisaged that the infantry would have already pushed inland by a few miles at this point, but the squadron could expect little in support and would have to find their own way through enemy lines at all costs. The squadron was given the highest priority for getting off the beach, such that once the beach commander felt that the detachment had a reasonable chance of getting forward, the squadron was to be instructed to go at once, as soon as the enemy crust was broken and there was a sufficient gap through the minefields. The squadron was not to be held up by the presence of odd enemy patrols or limited resistance. All vehicles within the squadron were to fly a red and yellow flag in order to aid their identification to the beach commander. From the squadron's landing point on Juno Beach to their targets, 2 main routes were identified. These were to be scouted by half-troops that were not assigned a Royal Engineer half-track. A joint route extended to the lateral route at Trèves, passing through Grèce-sur-Mer and Banville, from which the 2 routes were as follows. Route 1 headed west until the bend in the River Soule, then south to a point west of Tilly-sur-Seulles. Route 2 continued south over the River Soule at Crouly, then continued south to Calais and onto the Bayou Caen Road. From the endpoints of these 2 routes, the half-troops were to make their own way towards their designated target bridges. The reason for there being 2 routes out from the beach was so that should enemy resistance be encountered along one of these routes, the troops could be switched to the other route. The main objectives were to destroy 6 road bridges and 3 railway bridges over the River Orne. These were as follows. 3 bridges northwest of Le Homme were assigned to Troops 5, 3A and 3. 1 road bridge west of Brieux assigned to Troop 2. 2 railway bridges west of Meurtrier assigned to Troop 5A. 1 road bridge west of Amiens-sur-Orne assigned to Troop 4. 1 railway bridge west of May-sur-Orne was assigned to Troop 6. And 1 road bridge west of Saint-André-sur-Orne assigned to Troop 1. In addition, as a backup, 5 road bridges over the River Odon were to be prepared with demolition charges. Explosives from Troops 6 and 5A were to be left at the bridges over the River Odon, as their full allotment of explosives was in excess to requirement for their target bridges, being railway bridges. The bridges to be destroyed over the River Odon were assigned to Troops 1A, 2A, 4A and 6A. These were as follows. 1 bridge south of Ragny, 1 road bridge south of Le Lecheur, 2 road bridges northwest of Boégy, and 1 road bridge north of Gravus. It was deemed that blowing the bridges over the River Odon wouldn't provide a sufficient anti-tank obstacle. Therefore, all vehicles in the squadron were equipped with Hawkins grenades in order to carry out road cratering and mine laying. These bridges could only be destroyed with explicit orders from the commanding officer of the sector, this being either from the headquarters of 1st Corps, headquarters of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, or the 2nd Canadian Armoured Brigade. The squadron was to make no attempt to fight enemy opposition unless it was absolutely necessary. Ideally, the squadron was to bypass the enemy as per the armoured car reconnaissance doctrine. It was intended that upon reaching the bridges over the River Orne, they were to be held while being rigged with explosives. Then no less than 6 of the 8 bridges were to be blown, with a maximum of 2 being kept intact for Allied use, and only destroyed should capture by the enemy be inevitable. All troops were to withdraw to the west side of the River Orne prior to detonation, except 4 and 5 troops. which were to press on and reconnoitre the Forêt de Sanglé to confirm the presence of the 21st Panzer Division. Troop 4 and 5 were then to push further east to observation points from which they would carry out overwatch of the enemy and, if possible, make contact with the forward elements of the 6th Airborne Infantry. The rest of the troops were to carry out delaying actions against the enemy for as long as possible, gradually withdrawing and reporting on enemy movements. The force would then finally withdraw into Corps Reserve. Should the initial plan of reaching the River Orne or Odon not be achieved, then the squadron was to carry out reconnaissance on the enemy and report back on their strength, composition and direction. Secondly, it was to use its Royal Engineers and explosives to the best of its ability in order to delay the enemy. However, the river and road bridges in the area north of the railway line between Bayeux and Caen were not to be demolished. As it was expected that C Squadron was to be operating behind enemy lines, the following pre-arranged recognition signals were outlined. The squadron's daily armoured cars, whenever it was possible to do so, were to travel with their turrets rotated and their guns facing towards the rear. All vehicles of the squadron would continue to fly their red and yellow flags that had been deployed at the beach. In addition, should they be engaged or encounter friendly units, they were to deploy yellow smoke. Troops 4 and 5 were to identify themselves to the advanced elements of the 6th Airborne by flying blue pennants from their aerials of all their vehicles, and if shot at by allies, they were to display yellow Canice triangles and discharge yellow smoke. References are now shown on screen for the locations of where I managed to get most of this information from, and thank you for watching. Until next time, cheerio.